Welcome back to Growing Up Grieving. I am Kate Meduno, and today I have a special guest. I have Anthony O'Donnell. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I'm very, very excited to talk to you. And you are the lead director and fourth generation owner of O'Donnell Cremations and Funeral Home, funerals and celebrations, right? In Salem and Danvers, Massachusetts. We've got the Massachusetts vibe going on. It's exciting to have a funeral director on, I have to say, and I don't need to be weird, but it's such a fascinating industry. I kind of put you guys up there along with like health workers because I think it's so important. And at the same time, like I would never want to do it.
I get that a lot. So
I can only imagine the things that you have heard. Yeah. So I really wanted to talk to you today about kind of three different areas, and it really feeds my griefy brain. Obviously, this is a grief podcast, right? But there's so much that kind of goes through somebody's brain when somebody dies, and you're kind of like the first point of contact for those people. So your boots on the ground kind of what you do every day. And so I really want to talk to you today about the funeral business in general, and kind of like, the eyes of a griever, some questions and any personal insights you might have. But to get this started, I would love for you to explain how you become a fourth generation owner of a funeral home. And it's funny because we got connected through Pat Driscoll for Driscoll Funeral Homes, and he's done a ton of my family's funerals, and it's just a very interesting job. But I know that it kind of runs in the family. So if you could elaborate on that, on how this came to be, please.
Sure. So I'm fourth generation on my father's side and third generation on my mother's side. So
wow.
Both of my grandfathers were funeral directors. I used to say to my dad, you couldn't find a woman whose family owned a baseball team instead of, funeral homes. But so I was always around it from growing up. My parents were divorced. I grew up next door to my uncle and grandfather's funeral home, and my grandmother lived above the funeral home at our Salem location. So wherever I was always around it. So people say, oh, is that weird or odd? And it's really not for me because I grew up doing it and being around it. It was just part of our lives. And my dad, on the weekends when I was with him, he was a one-man business at the time. And what that kind of means is he would take the first call from the family. He would go bring the deceased into his care. He would embalm the body, dress the body, casket the body, lead the funeral, write the obituary. He did everything. My grandmother helped him, but we were much smaller then. So if he had a family call, I would go with him. So I was just this little kid, sitting in the hearse with my dad, and he would take the stretcher out to go into the nursing home, and I would go along with him, and most families, liked it because they're like, oh, there's, Tommy's son, the next generation coming along. Or, if it was a difficult moment, I would stay at the nurse's desk, but it was just kind of the continuation of, the family business. I get a question a lot, were you ever scared? And I was never scared. My dad always said, it's not the deceased you have to be afraid of, it's the live ones that'll hurt you, so which is true. Right. So but it was a different era, right? The 70s. So it's a different time. And I just wanted to be with my dad because it was my time with him, and he would be, embalming a body or preparing a body. And I'd be just like running around the prep room and, getting into everything. And then he would, one of the, part of the embalming process is to remove, the blood from the body and replace it with embalming fluid for preservation. So I'm just like 3 years old, and I'm in the prep room with
Wow.
dad, and I see him embalming a body, and I'm like, oh, well, look at all the oil coming out of the body, because I loved cars. I had Matchbox cars, so that's where my brain was trying to figure it
Mm-hmm.
out. But it was really, a family business. So, right, growing up next to my uncle's funeral home, all the part-time guys that work there and the funeral directors, when I'd be playing street hockey in the parking lot by myself, they'd pick up a stick and play with me before they'd go home. Every holiday, there was always, one of them there that lost a wife and didn't have a place to go. So, like, it was really
Wow.
just family, and same with my dad's side, it was always family. Kind of the weird thing, I think most funeral directors will attest to this, at holidays, my uncle and especially their family would always talk about who passed away during the year, like,
Yeah.
it
Like
would
a
just start the
recap.
conversation. Yeah. And like Uncle
Yep.
Walter would say it, and then granddaddy would remember something from that person. And then, my mom would be like, oh, I went to school with him. My cousins were like, oh, that was in my class, so it was kind of not odd or, or weird. But for me, I always knew that I wanted to be a funeral director. So even when I was a kid, my mom took me to the doctor, and I had my Matchbox cars with me, and I'm lining them all up in a little row. And the lady goes, oh, are you making a parade? And I go, no, I'm making a funeral. I'm making a funeral. And the lady got,
I love you. Oh my God.
the
That
lady
is the
got
best
so
thing I've heard.
weirded. She got so weirded out. My mom's like, no, no, no. We live next door to a funeral home. We live next to a funeral home. So it was kind of always in me. I saw it out my window. I was always around it. And, more importantly, like, I saw how the community respected my dad and my uncle, where whenever we went out to dinner, everyone would come over and see my grandfather and say, oh, Mr. Cuff, how are you? Or, Tommy O'Donnell, you were so good to us, so I wanted that in my life. Like, I think I get my energy from helping people and seeing that, and seeing the respect that my family was given by our communities was something that I wanted in my life. I couldn't just pull a lever every day or press a button
Yeah.
every day. It wouldn't work for me. So that's my story.
No, it's honestly fascinating to me. I grew up grieving, right? The show title, right?
Yeah.
But it's always been around me too. But it's always been something that, like, my mother's side of the family, we've always really tried to talk about, and because we've had a lot of death, we've had a lot of illness, and everything like that. So, in a way, like, you're relatable to me, and growing up, it's nothing to you. You're so used to it. You were literally raised that way around the deceased,
Yeah.
which is very interesting. I know I spent my time growing up and hanging out in the cemeteries and stuff like that, so it's kind of similar vibes, but not the same. You must get this a lot too. What are the biggest, like, misconceptions that people have about funeral homes, or about you? I'm sure people may be strange around you.
Yeah, they are. And I think people tend to look inwardly rather than outwardly. So
Mm-hmm.
when people act uncomfortable or weird around me, and it's taken a long time for me to get to this place, right? So I'm 40,
Oh yeah.
48, and when I was 20 or 25 or even 30, this was hard for me to swallow, because everybody likes to be liked, right? Um, so, like, they'd say, well, what do you do for work? And I'd say, I'm a funeral director. And I'd get one of like three responses. One, they'd be weirded out, right? And they wouldn't want to talk to me anymore, and they'd like leave. Two,
Wow.
they'd ask really weird questions of me, and then I would get weirded out and not want to talk to that person either. Or they'd be okay with it. And what I equate that to is, life's maturity, life's experience. And if someone has walked down a grief path before, they understand the value of
Yeah.
funeral directors, funeral service, celebrating lives. But that comes with life experience, right? So a lot of I'm sure you can attest to this. The world has changed, right? We used to have triple deckers and families all lived
Yeah.
together, 3 generations. And the young kids saw their parents taking care of their grandparents as they went through the dying process. They saw how their mom and dad grieved. It was all right there in front of them. And then these nursing homes got built and everybody shipped everybody off. And it was like, oh, leave the kids at home. Like, don't show them this.
Yeah.
Let's shelter them, which in turn, I think down the road hurts them, right? Because, loss and grief is a part of life, right? We talk about emotion a lot. The music is built on, like the music industry is built on emotion, right?
Yeah.
So, and loss is part of that. But if you're sheltering, the younger kids from it, they won't know how to experience it when it does happen, and they won't know how to experience it in a healthy manner.
That's so true. Because I'm an 80s baby, but I grew up, again, we try to talk about it, but at the same time, like my mother had a lot of chronic illness growing up, like from the moment that I was born. So and I'm the youngest as well. So I wasn't told everything.
Right.
Now I've been to funerals and stuff like that. It wasn't, I've experienced that from a young age, but it's something that people do not want to talk about still today. You're so right. And I try to tell my kids and I have conversations with them about it to make them okay with it. But then therein lies the whole kind of discussion we're talking about today is like, why is it so scary? And like you said, it used to be so different, right? So that kind of segues into my next question beautifully, which is, how has the funeral industry kind of evolved over the years? Because as you said, it's completely different now, the way that the world works, the last 20 years alone. What kind of, things have you seen in the industry?
It's a great question. So I remember when I first became a funeral director, which I graduated college in the year 2000, and I started funeral school at night, but working full time at the funeral home.
There's
Right.
funeral school. You're going to have to elaborate that on
Yeah.
after.
So, or they call it mortuary school. So you have to get, I call it funeral school because mortuary school like freaks people out. So like I say, funeral school. So you have to get a license to be a funeral director. So it's a 2-year program. And you have to do a 2-year apprenticeship in addition to it. It can be done concurrently. So while you're going to school, you have to do a 2-year apprenticeship, which is really smart, right? So you learn more on the job pretty much in any job. When I was in school, and I'd already been always around the funeral home, so I had an uptick of knowledge to start. And I worked there in the summers when I was in high school and in college. But when I was in school, I remember coming back and talking to my dad and be like, "Well, the book says you're supposed to do it like this," and he's like, "No, we don't do it like that. This is how we do it." So the apprenticeship is important. But I think in 20 years since I've been doing what I do, locally where we live, there was a lot of religious based choices and selections, right? So the Mulcahy family would call, I'm just making this up, and my dad knew, well, they're going to have a wake and a mass at the Catholic church and we're going to go to the Catholic cemetery. And now when that Mulcahy family calls, I don't know what they want. Right. So our role has changed. Instead of being order takers, right, we have to be educators, right? So I have to educate each family of every option that is available to them, because what may work for me in my grief and in my thoughts in celebrating the life of my loved one may not work for, the Smith family or the Jones family. So, I think that's a bonus, and it's better. It's more challenging on funeral directors today to be, educating themselves and continually understanding, what people want, and again being open and not having any prejudice of like saying, well, your grandmother always went to this church, why aren't we doing that, right? Like that's
right.
it doesn't matter to me what you choose. as long as you choose something, right? So my uncle would say, Anthony, I don't worry about the families that, choose just a celebration of life or, just a mass and they don't have the all traditional things. I worry about the families that don't do anything, right? So that's
Mm,
why I think during COVID, it brought forward the value of funeral service because we couldn't do anything, right? So
yeah.
many families were like, I can't celebrate the life, and so many families didn't go back to do that. But those that did, a year later, 2 years later, have found the value in being surrounded by those that love them in their most needing times. And that's what I always say to families. I say it doesn't have to involve me. If you want it to involve me, I'm happy to, honored to help, but just be surrounded by those that love you, whether it's in your backyard in a cookout and you're gonna have a toast, or it's your old traditional solemn high Catholic mass, anywhere in between. As long as you're surrounded by those that love you, then you'll start that healthy grieving period.
Yeah, no, great. You are a wealth of knowledge. I'm loving this.
Thank
I
you.
really am. It's so interesting. It really is so interesting to me. Um, so along those lines about the industry evolution, I'm sure. Well, I've seen, but not firsthand. I'll be honest, but I've seen that there's a lot of like trends kind of going on in the funeral business, like eco-friendly burial options and burying somebody into a tree or like this egg thing or something. You know, you mentioned that there's education in order to do what you do. Is there continued education? Do you learn about these different burial methods, and have you experienced anybody who's even interested in that yet, or is that like the year 3000?
So
Like,
so not everything on the internet's true, right? So so
I
just
love that
keeping
because people are going to need to know.
that's right, and keeping that in mind. So there every year we have to get so many continuing ed credits, right? But they can
Okay.
be done easily online. I've kind of made it, my charge within our, family of funeral directors and to my team and said, look, anything that you're interested in that will better the family's experience with us, I'm willing to support and pay for. So, I'm constantly encouraging them to be able to learn all the offerings, right? So, and in turn, like, let's be honest, it benefits the families that we're serving, but also benefits my company, right? When
Right.
families call us, we're the experts, right? So we need to know everything. If they call me and say, well, I would like this and I don't know about it, well, I'm not the expert. So I need to know as much as I can about every option and choice available. So green burial has kind of like a hot topic, and really it's just hearkening back to the traditional ways in which we used to do things, right? So and our the Jewish faith has been doing green burials for you know thousands of years. The Muslim families have been doing green burials for thousands of years. It was just society that changed, and now we're kind of focusing back on that. So the lack of green burial cemetery space locally makes it a challenge for us to provide that service. They can have a
Okay.
proportion green burial, but like I just did a full green funeral for a family about 2 weeks ago, and after the service, like there was 20 people around me like, this was great, I want this, how do I do it, so we've tried to lobby local cemeteries to have green sections because it is something that families want. I went to Salem State and had a doctor who is an environmentalist have me present to her students on green burial. So it is it's gaining traction. It's not there yet. Like, you can get away with not knowing if you're a funeral home really what it is. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not just about product, right? So you can buy a product that is eco-friendly, meaning it has no metals or is 100% biodegradable, but it's leaving the least carbon footprint that you can. So it's really interesting to me. I've always loved serving families that are outside of my norm. So if they have a different selection or choice. Those are my favorite families to help insofar as it's a challenge to me to be able to fill their needs.
That's cool. Yeah, it's interesting, and it's one of those things. Like, again, you see, and I just kind of wondered, how many people are actually even doing that. And it's a good point you made about the cemetery too, because I remember from all of the deaths that funerals I've been to, they put the casket down into like another box that is
Right.
like there's multiple kind of boxes that somebody gets buried in, and that's all like laws, isn't it? Like you can't
So
like
it's a
there's
great
certain
it's a great
rules.
question. So in Massachusetts, it's not a law, but the cemeteries make their rules. So 99% of the cemeteries require an outer burial container. There's a cemetery, on the North Shore that you have to be a resident of the town to buy a grave, but they allow green burials. And the family that we helped with that green burial, this was the first one they've done.
Oh, okay.
We've done, somewhat green funerals, but this person was placed directly into the earth with no vessel, no casket,
Really?
outer burial container.
Wow.
And it just happened to be like a beautiful day. It was clear. The birds were chirping. I mean, it was just right, so,
Yeah.
and even myself, I said, that was a great funeral. Like that was really like, it filled what a funeral should be. Like everyone walked away and said, wow, that was really, had meaning and was special. So, but like the pod where they show you like crunched up underneath and the tree growing up, that's not real. That's not
I
happening.
know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yes, I was like that, like egg thing.
Yeah. That's not
That's
real.
so funny. Okay, so we're not quite there yet.
No.
That's interesting though. This is really interesting. It really is. Okay, so along these lines, and even I wonder if it's kind of tied into education. How do you and your staff kind of handle the emotional weight of what you do? I'm a very emotional person. It's hard sometimes, right? And I'm sure you have to be, as you said, the expert, and you want to be professional. Do you guys train on how to handle situations like that? Or,
That's a
I
great
mean,
question.
that it's got to be tough. You're dealing with people who've lost people. I can only imagine the kind of people that have come in.
Yes. Yeah, it is. And, reminding yourself that people grieve in different ways, right?
Oh,
So
they so
is
do.
a constant, and being present and while you're making arrangements with the family and having some understanding and being empathetic are all important qualities and characteristics of a good caregiver and funeral director. But I think having the apprenticeship, right? Me sitting with my dad and for 2 years in arrangements and watching how he would walk hand in hand with these families was important. And I would say, well, don't you get upset, Dad? And he'd be like, well, of course I'm sad for these people, but they don't hire me to cry with them. They hire me to help them, right? So, when we leave, it's sad. Or anytime, a young person passes away or an infant dies, it's hard. You can just feel the air in the funeral home is thicker, right? Doesn't
Yeah.
matter which director's helping them. It's just tough, and I can't really go home and talk about it with my partner or my girlfriend or my friends, right? Because they don't really want to hear it, right? And they don't want to be brought down, right? So um, sometimes for me is I feel like I'm carrying their burden for a little while, right? So,
Yeah.
for the 5 days I'm with them, I'm, hopefully lightening their grief, right? So it is exhausting at times, right? So self care is important, which I'm not good at. So like I'll power through and work and work and work until I work too much and I'm carrying too much burden and I don't realize it, and then it hits me all at once and I need to like a week off, right? So
Yeah.
I try to focus on my team and say, okay, when you're off, you're off. I'm not calling you. I'm not bothering you. Make sure you're doing fun things to recharge and you're not just waiting at home to come to work again, because it can be all consuming. We only get one chance to do it, right? But
Yeah.
I think it's the emotional toll. This isn't true, but I say I'm dead inside, so don't don't listen to me. But that's just my way of dealing with it, right? It's like,
Yeah. Yep.
I'm always like, wow, it's really sad, And people would say, well, you see so many people at their worst, and I'd say, my dad would say this, is say, no, I see them at their best, right? Because they're under so much strife and stress that you see how strong people actually are, right? That they can like, how are you here with me right now when what's just happened? You know what I mean? How are you actually making these choices and decisions? How are you functioning with what you're dealing with? And it's amazing to me, so constant reassurance to the families that they're making the right choices. If a family calls and they call O'Donnell Cremations Funeral Celebrations, my first thing that I say to them is, I'll help you, so not to worry. Right. And they always go, oh, thank you. Right. Because they don't know what to do. So from that moment on, I'm carrying their burden. Right. So that I'll take care of it. Don't worry. Just tell me, how I can help you and I'll do it. So I think I was kind of brought up in, we don't say no, we just say whatever they wish we'll do, within reason. I can't break the
Yeah.
law, but like, but it can be very taxing and trying for sure. So if you don't have outlets and other ways to, heal yourself, it can be overwhelming. So there is a lot of burnout in funeral service. A lot of people don't realize that part of it. Like if they just go to school and they don't work at the funeral home, and then, certain cultures have different norms. So like one culture that we serve, whoever cries the loudest, whoever wails and rolls around on the floor the most is the most bereaved. And that's like how they show their community that they're bereaved.
Really?
Yeah. So like if you've never experienced that, it can be kind of jarring, right? Like the first time I helped a family from that community, like the night I left, I was like this, because it was so
a lot
much.
of emotion.
Yeah, it's a lot. So now I'm like, oh, they're fine, because
Yep,
then at the end of the
through
week, they'll get up, come over, give you a hug, and say that was great, thank you. So
Oh wow.
it's so, but the emotional toll is something that for years, like my dad never talked about, that generation didn't talk about. Luckily,
No.
Our association is focused on that, because there's there's a lot of burnout. And I'll say this too, like when I went to school 25 years ago, there was like 4 women in the class. And one of the local funeral schools just graduated a class of all women.
Oh wow.
Which is great, right? So
whoop, whoop, go women.
Yeah, I know, which is awesome, right? And
that is cool.
And they're, in touch with their feelings in a different way than men are, right? So I think, and a lot of women have come to great heights in our industry, so they've brought forward things that men, just inherently in their DNA don't think about, right? So and now putting that in front of us is really a benefit for us to be like, hey, I really should, take heed of what's being said. So great question.
That's interesting. No, I love the way you answered that. That's great. And so along those lines too, now do you have any women that work at your
this is the only guy you're talking to here. So I have all women directors. So myself,
really?
and so Diane Gallagher has been here 11 years. Brianna Bennett's been here 10 years. Robin Kalk has been here 3 years. And then my lead admin is Rachel, and my backup admin is Alexandra. And then I have 2 apprentices that are both female. And then my AFP, or Advanced Funeral Planner, Brianna Surratt, she is female as well. So the majority of my team is female.
Well, that's cool. That's just cool from a woman's stance.
Yeah.
and that is good for you, because diversity, right?
Yes.
It's honestly great to have. That's really cool. Okay, I didn't realize that there was that many women working there, because it, like you said, it is. I think everybody thinks of a funeral home and they think of men.
Yeah, an old white guy that's, kind of got white hair and skinny, so like I was different. I was young, right, in a suit, and I had long hair, and we're still a suit outfit. We still wear suits every day. That was just like
It's
how
a
I feel.
respectful thing, I
Yeah,
think.
and
Yeah.
some places don't, which is okay, right? Like they say, well, your family doesn't come in a suit, and I'm like, yeah, I get it. Like on the weekends, I'll wear khakis and a blazer, with a. I like to wear a tie myself, but I think just looking professional is, makes me feel more professional, right? So like it's all part of like I'm putting on my uniform, right, to
Yeah.
be my Anthony O'Donnell, the funeral director, and then so I used to coach lacrosse at Peabody High, so I'd like take my suit off and put my coaching gear on. Now I'm Coach Tony, so
Yep.
not that I'm still the same person, but just different, right?
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So I want to kind of shift a little bit to kind of, segment this more, a little bit more towards grief. Not that it's not about grief, anyways. But I just have some questions, kind of like from the eyes of a griever. So I know that you experience this all the time. People call you in the middle of the night, right? Funeral homes are open 24/7, aren't they? Or at least
Yes.
like you, right? Okay. So you get somebody and they call you and they're completely overwhelmed. Like, is there a go-to? I mean, you kind of already alluded to what you tell people, that like you try to reassure them instantly that you're going to be able to handle everything. But is there any advice that you typically give like along those lines too to people who are just like, oh my God, I can't even believe I'm talking to you on the phone and that I have to do this?
Yeah, and right. That's a great question. I think so. Uh, just I'll tell my story a little bit. So, 5 years ago, my dad died unexpectedly at a restaurant in town. Just had lunch, had a heart attack, got in the car, and God took him. So, I had spoken to him on the phone before he stopped at the restaurant. So, we had a family call that needed for us to bring their loved one into our care, and my dad said, well, I'll go to New Hampshire and take care of that for you. And I said, are you sure? He said, yes. I said, all right, I'll meet the family and you can go do that for me. And then the hospital called on his way to the funeral home and they weren't ready yet. So I called him back and I said, the hospital's not ready. He said, I'm going to stop for lunch, do you want anything? Blah, blah, blah. And so the last thing I said was, no, I'm all set. Thanks, Dad. I love you. And he said, I love you too. And hung up the phone. And then like 45 minutes later, I was getting the car ready for him to go to New Hampshire, and the phone rang, and they said he died. So my world was turned upside down like in an instant. And uh,
Sorry.
it was like someone went into my brain and shook it. That's what it felt like. Like my peripheral
Yeah.
vision went blurry, and I couldn't keep a thought.
Yep.
I still had to sit with that family and make arrangements because I was working by myself and I didn't tell them because it's not their burden to carry. So,
Oh my
yeah, which
gosh.
was really hard. And my friends came, like Pat and my friend Mark that owns Bull's Funeral Home in Methuen, and Louis that owns Toomey, LeBlanc, and Conti Funeral Home in Newburyport. They came right down to help
Oh.
my dad. And then it was I couldn't like something would come into my head and it was like went in one ear and out the other. My thoughts was just
Yep.
like I couldn't keep anything straight. And so my friends were like, you got to go home, like get your stuff together and like, you know, to call your family, call your
Yeah.
friends.
Because
Uh,
it happened. Oh.
yeah. So I've been in that moment, right? And, your first reaction is to be like, no, this didn't happen, right? So
Yeah.
I said to my friends, I'm like, I'm not having any services. I'm not having a wake. And they just stood there like, what's wrong with
Like,
you?
okay,
Like,
sure. Yeah.
you're having a funeral, you're having a wake. And I said, I got to have one. They're like, yes. And I was like, okay, all right. So, like, I understand that insofar as when these families call, you don't want to believe it's true, right? And,
Yeah.
um, my dad in his dying was continuing to teach me to be a better funeral director, right? By me
Oh.
actually sitting on that other side of the table. So, each person grieves differently. Would never tell someone how to feel, right? Because whatever they're feeling is the right feeling. Whatever choice is the right choice. And everyone's grief path is different. Some is smooth, some is bumpy. For me, with my dad, I look at it as perspective, right? So when I look back, there was nothing else I could do to be a better son. So my grief path has been as far as I know, has been easy, right? I probably haven't been, at first wasn't the easiest to deal with afterwards, projecting emotion. But I think each family is different. My uncle died, he was sick and he died. I didn't cry, I didn't do anything. And then we had a year mass later, and I just started crying at the church. It just all came out at once, and it took a whole year for that to build up and come out. So each death is different, each person is different, so it's not me to tell them how to feel. And grief is a powerful thing, right? It can overwhelm you. It can make you do things you don't think you should do. So I said, how can I make families' experiences better? So we didn't do any pre-planning for my dad. I didn't have anything written down. Anytime he'd
I
say
was
something,
curious,
yeah,
knowing what you do.
right, and he'd always say, "Oh, you'll know how to. You'll take care of it. You'll take care of it." Well, thanks a lot, right? Like, so.
I mean, yeah, thanks a lot, but also at the same time, I mean, he probably felt like he was in the best hands to
Right.
be able
Yes.
to,
Well,
but
I thank you for the compliment, but it was really, I was like, I'm not gonna do this again. So when, a week later, I went over and sat with my mom, and we did her prearrangement, and I'm gonna, still take care of it, but I had to make all these decisions and choices when I wasn't myself and I wasn't thinking properly. So I said, as a company, I said, we're going to make it our mission to educate the community on the value of advanced planning. And not only does it, help families in making smart and financially sound decisions when they're not under emotional stress and strain, it also allows you to grieve properly, right? So, like, you're already under enough stress. Now I got to decide, all right, am I going to have mom buried or cremated? And I never talked about it, and I'm going to carry this with me forever. So, like, we do community education seminars twice a month on the value of advanced planning. And I believe there's never been a family that said to me, "Oh, I wish mom didn't do her plan in advance." Right?
yeah,
Never once.
yeah.
And so that, I think, in addition, it helps with the grieving process, because look, I can just be with my family, and
You don't have to worry about it.
yeah, I don't, like, the decisions are all made. We just got to pick the day and maybe a couple songs and the food for the after gathering, or you know what I mean? Like, it's so much
Yeah.
easier and better experience.
That's really cool. You've probably heard many things, and especially about planning. Has anybody ever come to you and because they regret not doing something? Or, is there any way to avoid making the wrong decision?
So
It's probably hard and personal, but still.
yes, it is. It's a tough question too. So I had a family that said, "Well, can we, dig dad up? I just need to see him one more time." And like, I understand that, right? I fully get it. But like, that one last time is never going to be enough, right? There's always
No.
you're going to need to do it again. So, that's hard. And what I say to families, I say there's no wrong decision. Whatever decision you make is the right choice. Even if mom hasn't said this to you, like, you have to, if the only time people say I made a wrong decision is like when I was alluding to earlier, is when they say, well, I don't want to do anything, right? We're just going to have mom buried, or we're just going to have her cremated, and I don't want anybody around. And then they may come back and say, I should have done something, but other than that, as long as they're surrounded by their loved ones, and, to some family, and they have 10 people here, they think it's the biggest wake ever, and some families have 1,000 and that's not big enough, right? So life's about perspective, and if you have the right perspective, which I try to share that with families, is it can make your life a little bit easier as you go forward. And I always try to tell them, there are signs that they're still with you. When my dad died, he
So
always
you
had,
believe that? That was
oh
honestly
yeah,
one of my questions. Do you believe in the afterlife, and especially given what you do?
I
So
do.
you believe it? I absolutely believe it. But please go on. Tell me what you think.
So my faith tells me there is, right? And, but my dad had a like ceramic blue jay in his apartment, always in his apartment, I remember. And after he died, there was a blue jay sitting over my shoulder here out the window for like a week. And this was March and it was still
Oh,
cold and like that wasn't supposed to be. And the blue jay just sat there and I was like, all right, Dad, I'm still working. I haven't sold the business. I'm still here. So I definitely think there are signs, and there was something that we wanted for our business that was important to me. It wasn't important to my dad, but I think he encouraged it along the way, and it came about a week after he passed away. So
wow.
I believe in those things. I believe there are signs. If you're open to receiving them, they're there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, cool. I really, that was one of my last questions I had for you, was that, because I'm so into the signs. I talk to my dad every day. People are probably sick of hearing that on my podcast. They're like, we know you talk to them, Caitlin. Jesus, you say it every friggin' day. But I do, and I believe in that so much. So I love that you also believe that too, especially given your line of work. Like, it really, it makes me feel good inside.
Good.
No, it's like you deal with that every single day, so that means a lot. And hopefully I think it's going to resonate with my listeners. I really do, because again, everybody's always so afraid of funerals and everything. But it's funny because my experiences with the funerals that I've been over at Driscoll. I haven't had the opportunity to use their services, and I'm happy I haven't.
That's okay. Yeah.
But it is such a we've always had like a celebration. My mother's funeral, the last song we played was Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven. And I remember standing there, and it's friggin', it's like loud as everything, and I'm just standing there friggin' singing my Led Zeppelin. And it's like, everybody's experience with a funeral or a celebration of life is so different, and it's really interesting to hear your perspective. I just want to see, I think I might have a couple more questions for you. You've really given some really good insight, like, honestly.
Thank you.
There's got to be a rewarding aspect to what you do because of the nature of your business. You are handling people's loved ones. How do you explain that to people? Like, that you actually I mean, thank you for sharing the story about your father, by the way. It's hard. I lost my dad too, and it's tough. It's really tough. But try to convey to people that you actually truly understand, and that it can feel good to help other people. I don't really know where my question is going.
Yeah, no, it does. It does.
Taking legs.
I think if you don't get satisfaction from helping others, then the funeral profession is not for you, and or being a funeral director is not for you. So, for me, I like to be in control. I like to see things done right, and I like to help people, not in that order, but like I can fill my cup with those three things with funeral service.
Yeah.
And most funeral directors, and I say this across the board, touch more people's lives in a week than most people do in a decade. So, and that's how great that is that I can say that now at 48 years old. But I have a 30-year-old funeral director or a 25-year-old funeral director that don't fully grasp and understand the weight of what that is. So, like when they go out for drinks or they go to the supermarket and Mrs. Smith comes over and gives them a big hug, they don't know how to react, and they don't know how to take that, or, take it in a positive way. They may see it as a negative thing, like, oh, I can't be out without getting away from the funeral home. But like,
Yeah.
and that's a burden. And I remember walking that path when I was that age, and now I take it as, I'm lucky that I have that honor and choice to be able to help people. So I think in COVID, you saw a lot of people quit their job and realize like life is short and I want to do something meaningful. So a lot of people left their jobs and came to the funeral business. And it's not all roses, right? I'm not telling you it is. It's
I can't imagine it is.
yeah, it's long hours.
You're not fooling anyone.
No, right. Yeah, right. It's long hours. It's putting others before yourself, which can, have huge detriment in your personal relationships. If a real friend will understand, right? Like, and be like, hey, I can't make it to dinner. I just had this family call. I have to help them. A real partner will understand, but not everybody feels that way, right? And you don't have to live it like we live it, but in Massachusetts, most funeral homes are family owned. There are some corporately owned funeral homes, and they're smaller. So you don't have, 25 funeral directors and, 15 locations. Is
that how you guys all know each other, by the way? Like, I know, again, the connection to Pat, like, do you guys have like a funeral club, like powwow hangout? Like everybody brings their, I don't know. You got the popcorn this week. You can bring the beers.
Yeah,
we're having our funeral club guy hangout.
So I have. So it's funny you ask. So it's such a small group of people that everyone kind of has heard of everyone, or kind of knows everybody. And it was always like, hey, if another funeral home calls me and they need help, I will always help them, right? No matter what. Like, we will always help another funeral home. And that being said, like, I went to funeral school with Pat.
Okay, all right.
When Pat got started in his business, my dad was, the president or head of the board of funeral directing and embalming for the state. So he helped Pat out there to get his license, and they were very close, my dad and Pat. And then, but I have a group of funeral home owners from across the country, like my study group, that we get together twice a year. We talk multiple times a day, and we share, better ways to serve our families, better ways to be better business people. And that has added to my life, right? And like, from my friends in my study group, the investors study group, like, I've learned more from those guys because they are amazing business people, fantastic funeral directors, great caregivers. So everyone's kind of on the same ilk, and like anything, there's bad apples everywhere. And in funeral service, the bad apple always gets the headline.
Yep.
And there's, the majority of my dad would always say, most funeral directors are good people, right? Like, they want to help. They're never going to turn anybody away. They do things, from the back of the room, not from the front. They want Pat on, they'd rather not take the headline. They'll, family comes and doesn't have means, we'll just take care of it. So my dad would always say, we'll get our reward a different way. So it's being part of a community, and society's changed. So that's, sadly to state, it's leaving, right? So not totally, but it's not as it was before. It's changing.
Yeah.
In a different way. And like, Pat started a funeral business from nothing, and it's going to take his whole life to build that business into a big business, right? His whole life. It will take his whole life. He's out every night at community meetings. He's out, working funerals during the day. It's his whole life, right? It doesn't happen overnight. And because your reputation is everything, right? In our business, It really means so much. And, I think it's added so much to my life. But as I get older, I understand, I sometimes have to look in the mirror and say, all right, I have to put myself first today, because if I don't take care of me, I can't take care of you, So as I'm aging, I think I get more, I get tired more easily, because of the news that I'm carrying. Yeah, right. So like, I think, I have to be better to myself, like be a better friend to myself, and that way I'll be able to take care of others better. So I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. It does. You've given me a lot of insight, and I hope that people take away from this conversation that I again, I feel like people view funerals and a funeral director as like, you know, the creepy man in the suit. But you think you're in a suit, but you're not creepy.
Thank you.
You're the furthest thing from it. And empathy goes a long way. And I think it's fair for me to say that grief has made an impact in the way that you handle your business
100%.
With your own dad, right? And perhaps, there are other people who just don't really quite get it yet. They just haven't experienced grief or, right. And that's a part of life too, is that not everybody, knows it from when they're young. Some people, the first death is, they're much older. So you've given a lot of insight, and the idea of getting you on today was to get people more comfortable with it, because it's a grief podcast. Nobody likes death.
Right.
Nobody likes death. We're all sad that we've lost our people, but it's really comforting to know that there's people like you out there that honestly you get it, and that you are just there to help the family. That's a beautiful thing, and I commend you.
Thank you. And I think, in today's world, technology is such a big part of everything that we do. And there are amazing ways to honor and celebrate people's lives. But in addition to that, there's also, if people are struggling with their grief, right? So each family that we serve, they get a text message from us that is through Brighter Mornings, and that leads them down a path through their grief path. So it's not always A to B to C to D, but I've had families, like for me, that wouldn't work. I'm an experiential person. I like to be in the room with the person across from me. But some people have come to me and said, Anthony, thanks so much for sending that grief text message to me. And it walks them through like the different steps and tricks on how to handle your grief and what to do. Our local hospice here in Danvers has grief therapy groups for all different types of loss. So, loss of a spouse, loss of a child, loss of a sibling, accidental loss, overdose loss. So there are resources out there. The children's room is a new grief building or grief group for children that have had a loss. So, I think your podcast in and of itself, and all of these other people talking about their grief before they hit it, right? I wear black, I hide it, and then they get sick, right? Or, now we're open to talking about it. And that's really important to do, because it can be overwhelming and debilitating. I've seen it, countless times of them not, facing it and realizing like, hey, this is powerful, right? This is powerful.
Yeah. If you don't face it, it will come with a reckoning.
you know it.
That.
Yeah, right.
I know that so well. I've literally spent the last year focusing on my grief, and it has definitely helped, but wow. Just, oh my God, there's so much to it. How about we leave with this? Please let everybody know, what is your website, if anybody is local and they do need your services, how they can get in touch with you.
It's o'donnellfuneralservice.com, and we have some great information there about all different types of ways to celebrate a life, planning in advance, grief resources. Even if we didn't serve you, you can sign up for Brighter Mornings and our grief therapy text messaging. So, your local funeral home, wherever that may be, is going to be, if it's family owned or corporately owned, right? But that they're a great resource. And, you'll know any funeral home that you go to, you'll know right away if they're caring people and they want to help you, right?
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, is there anything else that you need to let the grieving community know about funeral directors or funerals?
Just like you said, we're not scary. We're here to help you, and do the best that you can, one day at a time, one step in front of the other. Know there are people out there that want to help and are there for the right reasons, and most funeral directors are there to do so. And stay strong.